part of the argument I offer is that you can think of the democratic political system as sort of like the microscopes that have a coarse control and a fine control. And the fine control is basically special interest lobbying, and the coarse control is democratic voting. And democratic voting, because voters are rationally ignorant, is driven by free information. It's driven by the things that people know without having to actually do any research on them. Free information, of course, is quite often worth what you pay for it. It is often not accurate information. So one of the things one can do is to try to change the mix of free information that's out there. So that one of the things that I've done and see echoing at various points online is come up with a explanation of why free trade is a good thing, which doesn't require very many economics. It's basically an explanation of Ricardo's principle of comparative advantage. But the way I put it is that we have two technologies for producing automobiles. We can build them in Detroit or we can grow them in Iowa. And the way you grow automobiles in Iowa is you grow the raw material they're made out of, which is called wheat. You pile it on a ship. You send the ship out into the Pacific, and it comes back with Hondas on it. And that's a mechanism for producing automobiles just like building them in Detroit. That therefore, there's competition between the mechanisms, but it's not competition between Japan and America. It's competition between American farmers and American auto workers. And if you impose a tariff, that's simply a tax on one of those technologies. It has the usual problem that it means that even if the technology that you're taxing actually does the job cheaper, you'll end up using the other technology. So that's my point is that particular way of presenting the idea is sort of easy to remember, easy to repeat. It's a good story. It's got a good punchline, so to speak. And therefore, it very slightly tilts the balance of what everybody knows. And I think there are lots of things you can do that way. One of the functions of being an academic is to try to shift the field in such a way that the people who were your students when they become professors will teach different things, and that will affect what college students believe and so forth. And I think in many ways our opposition has done that very effectively, but we can do it too and should. So that's one approach. Another approach is trying to create alternative institutions, that if somebody could come up with a inexpensive, good substitute for the public schools, well, if it gets cheap enough, even without vouchers, a lot of people will use it, and vouchers become more attractive in that environment. Similarly, for lots of other things, that if you had proposed abolishing the U.S. Post Office 50 years ago, the response of most ordinary people would be, that was an absurd idea, who would carry the mail? And of course the answer nowadays is, well, I expect UPS or FedEx could do the job. That we have a case where institution is developed, that we're in effect competing with the government institution and doing it well enough so people no longer take it for granted that you need the government institution. So that's a different one. Yet another one is the one that the Libertarian Party exemplifies. And that, as I see it, really has two related functions. One of them is taking advantage of the electoral process when people are likely to be paying attention to political ideas, to political issues, to spread libertarian ideas, to try to change the general public view. And the other is that to the extent you are successful enough so that you're getting 3%, 4%, 5% of the vote, something nowhere close to winning an election, but large enough to swing an election, you've now created an incentive for the other two parties to say, well, are there some of the issues that those nuts are proposing that we could propose too and get some of those votes for us? So I know my father used to argue that the most successful political party in American history was the Socialist Party, that the Socialist Party never elected, I think, anybody more important than the mayor of Milwaukee, if I remember correctly. But if you compare their platform in around 1900, I don't know exactly 1900, to the platforms of the Republicans and the Democrats today, you discover that they won, that a very large number of their issues are now accepted policy. And we'd like to do the same thing in the opposite direction. So that's yet another. So those are all different things. And I think it's a mistake to believe that there is a correct libertarian policy.